You're listening to the Align and Expand podcast. Join your host, Lauren Runyon, in conversations that will inspire you to intentionally create a life you love. Hello, Giulietta. How are you?
Hello, I'm very, very well, thank you. Yes, excited to be here, excited to chat. First podcast interview of the year, so it's very exciting.
Yeah, that's gonna set. I've been, it's mine as well, and I have been looking forward to this for so long because this is a subject since learning about manifestation that I have wanted to know. And then I heard you on another podcast, and I'm like, she's it. She's who I want to learn this from. And I think that all of the information that you share, especially I follow you on Instagram, everything that you share there it's so perfect. And I've learned a lot from you. I've changed a lot from you. So I can't wait to dive into our hormones, how we can use them with our manifestation. I am someone who became really interested in how the hormones affect manifestation because I feel like, I don't know if it's possible, but I feel like I'm really sensitive to the hormones, or I have something's off in my hormonal balance because I do have PMDD, and it's something that I have worked to get under control for a long time. But so for me, that means 2 weeks out of the 4-week month, I'm struggling to keep my emotions in check. Basically, and I don't like to use the words I'm struggling, but I am. It's a constant battle almost to keep everything in check. And when you first start manifesting, you learn keep it high vibe, your dominant vibration. It's all of these things, but then you're like, well, my hormones are a mess. I'm trying really hard, but to bounce from really low to really high doesn't always feel possible. So then I thought that maybe I was the only one that had this question because I haven't heard anybody address it. And then I happened to see some other girl post a question on somebody else's Instagram account. But what about my hormones? I'm like, I have to address this because I can't be the only one. And I know that my listeners, I have a variety of listeners. Some of us are still having our menstrual cycle. I do have a lot of listeners that have also entered menopause. And so I'm sure the hormones still affect you the same way, but maybe differently. I don't know. I should be learning about menopause. It's coming, but so I think that let's just start now that I've got that blurb out of my mouth. Let's just start with who you are, what you do, and then we'll kind of head into all about the hormones.
Yeah, perfect. And I love that blurb, by the way. Just such a good way.
Just kind of came out my mouth.
But it's so good to set the scene, right? So, so my name is Giulietta. I am a menstrual cycle nutritionist and period coach. I change my title all the time because I feel like I'm evolving. And I'm like, oh, what's my 2022 title going to be? Because I'm always evolving. But ultimately, I think that the core of my work is helping women balance their hormones, but also fall in love with their hormones and with their cycles and develop a new relationship. This really ties in with what you're saying about not being able to manifest 2 weeks of the month and all this kind of stuff, right? Really stepping into a new kind of way of living with our menstrual cycles, accepting the highs and lows, laughing at the lows, being okay with the lows, beating the pillows when we're lows, enjoying the highs, accepting that they don't always last. And really, it's all for me about cyclical living, just really embodying cyclical living. And I do that in a number of ways. I do one-to-one work, I do group programs. I am a science geek, so I will go deep into the science, but it's a lot more than that for me. And it's like, let's balance your hormones and let's see what your cycle looks like to you and how it manifests in a different way, for you every month, and how you can work with that. Because I think the messaging has been off for such a long time around hormones. I think the messaging of, oh, wake up and feel amazing every day just makes us feel like, actually, excuse my language, like shit about ourselves for at least 2 weeks, like you say. And you're like, well, how do I work with this? So that's really what I do. And I use food, I use supplements, meditation, lifestyle, whatever, anything that we can use to really help us embody that, what it means to be cyclical, basically.
Yeah, I love that. And that was actually one of the things that when I heard you on the podcast, it was a beautiful podcast. And then I went straight to your Instagram while I was listening to the podcast. And you had I don't remember, it wasn't a story. It must have been a reel or something. And you were talking about not feeling good during your ovulation. And that was exactly where I was. I'm like, here I am. I'm in my ovulation. I feel like shit. I hate everyone. I hate my life. I hate myself. Like, I'm tired. What's happening? I should not be feeling this way. I get 2 weeks of my life that I feel good, and I don't feel good in this period. What's
Yeah.
happening? And so I
Yeah.
love that you address that in what you're talking about, because even cyclically, you may not present the same way each cycle, right?
hmm You may not present the same way each cycle, or every few years we have big shifts in our hormones. I have seen in many women, including myself, when you're moving more into perimenopause, that ovulatory time isn't, that the fun and games that it used to be anymore, because our estrogen is going off. And actually that build up sometimes to our periods is a more comfortable time once you're in perimenopause. So it's like, yeah, and you're so right, because also don't forget that we ovulate from different ovaries. It's not necessarily left, right, left, right. It could be like left, 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 right, whatever. But that will also impact, because potentially you're not always ovulating. That causes a whole different cascade of hormones. So within our own patterns, we will have other patterns, and sometimes we don't have any patterns at all. And this is what menstrual cycle awareness really teaches you. It's to just have a bit of humor about everything, and to just sometimes just go, do you know what, like, there is no pattern this month. This is a difficult month. We're very susceptible as women to changes in our environment, to stress. I'm not even going to allude to the stress that we've all been having in the last 2 years, but we all know what's been going on, right? So it's like all that has a huge impact on our cycle. So potentially, you've been having a certain type of cycle for like years. You wake up one morning and it's completely different. And it's really important to raise awareness around this.
Mhm.
And I'm glad that post or whatever, the reel I did on ovulation, really resonated with you, because it's important to say this, because when you get into cyclical living at the beginning, it's like, oh, I should always feel good when I ovulate. And you do that and you're
Mhm.
like, you're doing that for a while. And then all of a sudden you wake up one day and you're having a awful ovulation. And we go back into the narrative of what's wrong with me. And that's one of the other things that I'm really passionate about, kind of shifting. It's like, there's nothing wrong with you. You're a cyclical being, and that's just part of what it is to be cyclical. Because especially, I think women, we always go back to this question of, oh well, it must be me, I'm the problem, not that
Mhm.
society isn't built to support me or whatever. I am clearly the problem. That's one of the things that I really am very passionate about, kind of breaking through, basically.
Yeah, it really puts you into an empowered state, knowing what's happening, and it's not just you when have the awareness of what might be happening. And I've learned, now that I've started to pay more attention, once I learned that, okay, I'm not always going to feel good at my ovulation, that it could just be any influx or change in my
Mm-hmm.
hormones that's
Mm-hmm.
going to create this ripple effect of who knows what kind of mood that's going to come up. Like, but okay, cool. This, who knows what's supposed to really be happening, but because I've had this change in hormones, then
Yeah.
I am feeling different or off. Like, so what I used to, kind of like what you're saying, what I used to feel really right before my period now happens sometimes at a different part, but it's usually where
Yeah.
there's some kind of change in what the hormones are supposed to be doing. I don't scientifically know it very well, but I know there's changes.
And you don't even need to know scientifically. I think if just you develop that awareness in your body, and you know how to kind of hold yourself and navigate those times, then you're there. You are doing the work, basically.
Yeah, yeah. So, and one of the things, that it isn't that I necessarily felt like I couldn't manifest during those 2 weeks. It's just that there was so much confusion. And almost like you said, there was this feeling of, what's wrong with me? Why can't I feel so great all the time? Or how do I keep this from making me feel so bad? And it really morphed into, it's okay. How can I work with how I'm feeling right now? It isn't about changing. I mean, yes, there was definitely aspects they needed to work on. There was definitely stuff that came up, to improve as a human, so that, again, I wasn't playing victim or all of those things. But it was moving into a space of, how can I work with this? So where do you think the best place to start is to kind of chat about the hormones in general and how they affect our mood? Not, because everyone's cycle is going to be different, like, throwing that out there, even menopausal. But do you think that's a good place to start?
Yes, I think let's have a little hormones 101, how they affect our moods, the menstrual cycle, so we have a bit of an understanding, and then we can go into more the real, like, how to use this for manifestation, and
Perfect.
for that practice. So yeah, like, right, let's do a really good summary of it all. So what I would say is, the menstrual cycle, and for women who are no longer menstruating, you can still do this, you can still be cyclical. What I always say is just use the moon cycles to really help you sort of have a connection, because ultimately a menstrual cycle is our connection with nature. It's the same thing, right? So there's no reason why you can't do this after you stop having periods. So the menstrual cycle is divided into 4 phases. I love to use the kind of model of the inner seasons. I love this because, again, it really connects us with nature, and it's such an easy model to just refer to because we all know what the outer seasons are like, So it's like, it's very easy. You can go like, okay, I know how I feel in winter. So that's what my inner winter feels like. So inner winter is when we are bleeding. It's our menstruating days. We call it, that's the beginning of a cycle. We call it, there is a little bit of debate around that, but to make things easy, I always say day 1 is the first day of bleeding. And it lasts for the entire time of your bleed. And this is very much our inner winter. So if you think about, it's winter where I am. I think it's probably winter where you are, so we know how we feel in winter. Our energy is a bit low. We want to sleep more. We want to hide away from the world. And in terms of hormones, the 2 major hormones that we're thinking about when it comes to female health is estrogen and progesterone. These are the 2 main hormones. And a quick detour, estrogen is called, we like to call it the Beyonce hormone. So it's like the woohoo, look at me, she's the one that's like, hello, boys, I'm here, very kind of like queen energy, very kind of like, check me out, ready to take on the world. And then progesterone is more the kind of Netflix chill, very kind of like curl under a duvet, that kind of much more like a calmer energy. So it's very much these 2 that we're kind of feeling into throughout the month. And when we are bleeding, both of these are low. They're at their lowest. So we don't have the woo Beyonce kind of vibes, but we, even the progesterone is quite low. So because sometimes progesterone can be a bit of a funny one, but it can also give us a bit of a kind of like, we sometimes want to do things like lots of clearing and tidying and nesting. We're not like that at this point. We're just like very low. And we can feel that, right? When we're bleeding, like it's just that kind of like, just going inwards. There's a lot of just like very, very calm, a beautiful time for meditation because we're just, we're just in this very, just sort of like serene state. Not always. Let's always put that caveat there, right? This is always different for everyone, but this is kind of like a rough model. So then we finish bleeding and we come into our inner spring. And we all know what happens when spring starts, those first times when you see those little, like the buds coming out and the daffodils and you're like, yay, it's that kind of feeling. What's happening hormonally? Estrogen is starting to rise. So that's the beginning of like that sense of renewal and life coming. And we're getting ready to ovulate. We're getting ready for that egg to pop out of the tube and come down into pop out of the ovary into the fallopian tube and then come down. So it's very much a beginning of fertility kind of idea, beginning of growth. So you might start thinking, this estrogen rise just makes you feel like, oh, I'm ready to come out in the world again, and in terms like to talk about manifestation, this might be a time when all of a sudden you're like, oh, I can think about manifesting, like I had a block. We will go into it in more depth, obviously, but it's this feeling of, oh, all of a sudden I've got my journal out and I am actually capable of thinking about manifesting. That's
That's good, yeah.
estrogen. That is estrogen. It's just this very much like back into the world feeling. Then we get into our inner summer, which is our ovulatory phase. It's when the egg actually gets popped out of the ovary. That is a quite short, intense period. That's when estrogen hits its peak. And in theory, that's when we should be feeling our best. Like that is the real, like proper out in the world, lots of energy, sometimes actually a bit exhausting because we maybe cannot sleep properly, that kind of stuff. And that's when, like in terms of manifesting, again, this is when maybe you're doing like 1,000 journal entries a day, those days when you're like, yeah, I'm doing this and that. And I'm really, it's very easy to connect with spirit or this, you know what I mean? All this kind of stuff. That's that kind of feeling that you can get from your estrogen.
You said that estrogen's at your highest in your summer. Is that what you said?
Yes,
Okay.
yes. So it peaks.
What's happening with progesterone there? Is it just like,
Progesterone at this point is still not doing very much. Progesterone is going to come into its own now. So
okay,
what happens is a few days after we ovulate, progesterone starts getting released because progesterone is the hormone of pregnancy. It prepares the womb for implantation. It prepares the womb for an embryo to grow. But the body doesn't know yet whether we have got pregnant or not. So it always produces progesterone just in case we have got pregnant. It's very clever. It's like, okay, just in case, we're going to produce this progesterone. If you don't ovulate, and many women don't ovulate, or we certainly don't ovulate every month, you won't produce this progesterone, which can lead to that PMS sometimes, because estrogen and progesterone are a bit of a yin and yang. They kind of calm. Progesterone will calm the estrogen down. So now the progesterone starts rising. And this is where we start moving into what we call our inner autumn. So think about autumn outside. We're starting to slow. We're starting to want to retreat, to nest. Being the hormone of pregnancy, like whether you're pregnant or not, like so many women at this time find that they start doing some like manic clearing or cleaning, or all of a sudden, like. And I love to think about it like we're nesting in preparation for our bleeds. We don't we're not going to have a child every 9 months. We're not going to be.
thankfully?
Yeah. But this is that kind of energy. um and progesterone can be very calming, very soothing. For most women, some women actually is complete opposite. So it's really important to know how these hormones feel for us. I think that's a really important, like you said earlier, I don't know what the scientific explanation is, but I kind of know the feelings and the shifts. And it's how do these hormones express themselves in you? How do they make you feel? And I think that's going to be key when we move on to the manifestation part of what we're talking about.
Mhm.
But progesterone generally very calming, very soothing. Um, what else around progesterone? Sometimes you can get a bit hungrier around progesterone because there are shifts in our blood sugar as well in the inner autumn time. So we get more like that cravings kind of sort of presentation. But also this inner autumn is a bit of a roller coaster because estrogen also peaks again, not as high as before, but there's still a peak. So there's a little bit of a kind of I like to call it like a bit of a complicated dance between them at this time. And that's what can lead to that tumultuous, like, okay, one day, but in the morning, but then crying your eyes out in the evening. And, like that kind of PMS kind of feeling. And that's where inner autumn for a lot of women is the most challenging time hormonally. And again, if we kind of refer back to the whole idea of manifesting, this might be a time when it's also a challenge because we are really, it can throw up a lot of stuff in autumn. It's a real time for truth speaking and accessing deeper levels of ourselves and shadows. And it's not an easy time, not, like,
Mhm.
and I think it's about really understanding how to work with these times. And in the past, we've always been told, take a pill, or take a painkiller and ignore this and battle on through. And now we're really shifting to okay, so how can we work with these more challenging times? And then, yeah, we get to the end of inner autumn and then we will start a new cycle and we will bleed once more and back into our inner winter. So that's kind of a hormone whistle stop tour, what happens every month.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That was perfect. It was really good. And I actually, I have my background is in nursing. And so I like know all these things, but sometimes, a lot of stuff doesn't like to stay in my brain. It doesn't hold on to really specific things. But I will
Mm,
always remember the estrogen and the progesterone thing now, like the Netflix and that was a really good explanation that I think it'll sit with them way longer than what it has for me in the past for sure. And I love the seasons. And I think
mhm.
it's so important. I feel like women in general, anybody that I'm talking to, they can have these periods, especially like right in that autumn when you're saying that everything's
Mhm.
kind of, well, I'm not going to say, so I'll mess it up, but when we can be harder on ourselves and they
Yeah.
don't realize, like I work with a lot of female entrepreneurs and they're like really hard on themselves. I'm like, hey, when are you going to start your period? Or like, where are you at in that cycle? Because that's when that inner critic seems to come out the
Yes.
most, I feel.
Mhm. Absolutely. Inner autumn is the home of the inner critic, of the wild woman, because there are also like different archetypes associated with every season. And definitely inner autumn it's a tempestuous time. It's all there. But if we know how to work with our critic and recognize the wild woman and everything else, we can just kind of actually we can make incredible leaps forward in our personal development, in our careers, all sorts of things. It's just that for centuries we have been told to ignore all of these. They're almost like coaches and teachers that reside in the menstrual cycle, right? But we're like,
Mhm.
no, suppress her, because I mean
Yeah.
nobody really likes a truth speaking woman who turns around and says, well, no, I'm not going to do that.
Yeah. Well, that was kind of going to be my next question. In your opinion, what do you think the purpose of all these different archetypes or these different in each cycle? What do you think the purpose is for us to have that? I mean, other obviously than producing and being childbearing and all of those things, but why do you think we have this period where we have this inner critic? Do you think it comes down to this is just a crazy question. In your opinion, why do you think we have that?
Very good question. I believe they're there to guide us. I do believe they are like little. Well, I call the menstrual cycle like the best life coach you can ever have. I
Mm,
really do. I like our own inner life coach, because we can access different energies. Our brains work differently at every single stage of the cycle, so we have different type of like um, processing skills. We have different ways of seeing, different ways of speaking, understanding the world. So we get different angles and different types of perception every week of the month, which is amazing because, and we also have points where we're more able to weigh things up more logically. But then we also have other points where we're able to see through all the bullshit, and it's like,
mm,
okay, now I really understand. So I really believe, apart from obviously procreation, which is what genetically we're all here to do, whether we like it or not, this is what we're here to do. I do believe these different phases of the cycle are here to guide us and help us navigate, our lives. But we just haven't been sort of taught how to access this wisdom, but like, what were I believe, like, witches in the past would have worked very closely with their cycles, would have used, that they would use menstrual blood for like casting spells and all of this kind of stuff. So there's always been a knowledge that there is a very deep power in the cycle, but we just have forgotten it, basically.
mhm. Yeah, and you kind of touched on it. It just dawned on me that, from a subconscious mind perspective, because everything that we take in is based off of our filters that are going on in our head. We're gonna have different filters at each part of our cycle.
Hmm.
Everything from time, your mood, every bit of that is going to absolutely, because that's your brain's job to, distort, delete, or generalize whatever it is that you're taking in based off of these filters, which are going to change cyclically. And that actually never snapped into place until you said it. Even though I knew
Mm,
that, even though I knew that that's what your brain does, I didn't attach it to that hormonal perspective as well.
yeah,
They should have that in the
absolutely.
books. Like, it's based on another filter is your hormones, because your
Mhm.
hormones really affect so much of that.
Absolutely. I mean, a classic example, right? Like our relationship with our partners, so potentially ovulation, you're not being irritated by them. And in fact, you're quite attracted to them or more attracted than you would normally be. And you don't really see the untidiness or something, or you come home and there's loads of dishes piled up, but you're like, oh, it's okay. You come back to that a week later in your inner autumn, and believe you me, that filter will be completely different.
Right.
And you're like,
Yeah.
okay, I'm not putting up with this anymore. The thing
Yeah.
is, because the messaging for so long has been like, you are the problem, you need to control your emotions. Nobody likes a woman who cries or has these like, meltdowns. So we kind of just keep it to ourselves, or we have a little cry or whatever, but this filter might be there to really show us something. It's like, okay, something here isn't working. But when you have a lot of estrogen in you, you're so people pleasing, you're so kind of, oh, it's no problem, that you just gloss it over. But now you're here at this point, just sit in this for a minute, and sometimes it's just a case, you are a little bit like, all over the place, and it's just the dishes and that's it. But sometimes it's a much deeper thing. And that's why I love this work, because you're like, okay, so what's really going on here? And one of the things I recommend that my clients do is you create like an inner autumn list, right? So have a section in your journal, or however you kind of sort of like write your thoughts or whatever, and have an inner autumn list of the things that really annoy and irritate you, or anything that's really, getting to you at a deeper level. And it's not actually the time to solve anything, but it's a time to get it all out and then go back to it. For example, when you're bleeding, when you've got a bit more clarity, or even like maybe in your inner spring, and look back and go, you know what, this is a deeper thing. This I want to do more work on. And it's so powerful, because you can get this clarity into sort of like things that are really, they need work, or they you need to have those conversations, or it's not just about coming home to a dirty pile of
Mhm,
dishes. It's
mhm.
about something else. And
Right,
that is where
right,
that beautiful kind of type of life coaching can happen.
right. That is beautiful. And I just keep thinking about when you mentioned the dishes and the partner, from if your partner is a man, the men don't get it. They don't get that you have these, they're like, I'm the same. Like, I didn't change. That's what I hear from my husband all the time. This isn't me, this is you, because you're the one that's changing. And I'm like, no, this is not me. Like, I'm totally like, because I just express it. It just comes out my mouth, definitely right before my period. So I
Yeah.
love that suggestion to write it down, because then after it comes out your mouth and you're like, no, that wasn't really that big of a deal. I really didn't mean to act like that. Oops, sorry. But then sometimes it does boil down to like, I really don't feel loved right now, or I don't feel heard right now. Like, can you like help me feel this love that I'm needing? Or not even, or even deeper, realizing that you don't need it from that person. You're not giving the love that you need to yourself. Like
Hmm.
really spending that time to go deeper. So I love that. So how can we start to use these hormones for manifesting? Because I know that when you and I talked and we were just going back and forth through instant message in or DMs and Instagram voice messages, like you mentioned
Hmm.
in the shadow work. And so since you said it,
Mm.
I really focused on like it being a time to focus on shadow work. So I can't
Yeah.
wait to hear your perspective on how we can start to really use these hormones during our manifestation. And I do want to throw it out there, even though I don't say it very often, we are technically manifesting all the time.
Mm.
Everything, it's not that you turn it on and you turn it off, it's happening all the time. But what you want to do is be a very conscious manifester. You want to really be like, okay, is this what I want to happen in my life, or is this not what I want to happen in my life? And
Hmm.
then choose, this is the power I want to have, and I want to create this space
Mm.
during my autumn that feels a little different. And then you can choose. You can choose not to, but I think awareness is the key. So how do you think we start to use our hormones with the
Mm.
process of manifesting? And
Yeah, I mean, we could talk about this for hours, but I
I
think
know.
I think the first thing is like, maybe, once we start developing some cyclical awareness, like I said, understanding how these different phases feel for you and what kind of manifesting mood they put you in. Does that make sense? So is it like
Mhm.
oh, this is a high vibe moment. So this is where I'm going to be maybe writing out the really kind of, or saying out loud the really audacious, the really big, bold kind of statements that are feeling good in my body just now. You feel that alignment. And that could be a great place to start, thinking, oh, actually 3 days after I stop bleeding, that's a great time for me, and maybe developing that awareness. But then it's like, what about the other parts? I think this is the really like the juicy bit, like you say, what about the parts when you feel very disconnected with these kind of like very high vibe, big kind of manifestation goals, all of this. And like I said to you in those voice notes, I believe that to manifest, you need to have your subconscious on your side. You need your shadow to be on board, right? Because for me personally, I've spent many years, following all these kind of like lovely manifestation guides and everything, and always feeling like there was a big piece missing, and never noticing like I had subconscious sabotage going on sometimes, and it was only when I started working more with shadow work, doing a bit of breath work, working on my subconscious, that I was like, oh, okay. So I know who's really in charge. It's
Mhm.
not it's not my conscious self at
Right.
all. It's like I can tell you 1,000 times that I don't know, that I want to live in the sunshine constantly and earn whatever, $20,000, $30,000 a month. But like, now I see why it's not happening,
Mhm.
because there are all these like, like shadows and subconscious beliefs that are stopping me from doing this, and I can't even see them. And this is where I feel like the shadow really like lives again. It's the inner autumn, it's potentially menstruation, it's a darker side, It's a more kind of yang kind of side, and that's where we can do this work. I believe, well, actually, I think there are some studies that show, well, I've already said that the brain changes throughout the month anyway. But as we move more into like our inner autumn and then building for our periods, we are in more of a delta wave state. So delta waves are more the ones we produce during meditation. Tibetan monks are the masters of delta wave production. But as women, we have delta wave access to those delta waves amazingly
That
every
is
month, right?
amazing. Yeah.
I know, like,
I've
these
never heard
months have to.
anyone say that.
It's. I
That's
mean,
amazing.
it's incredible. It's not easy research to find. It's kind of a bit like hidden, but if you,
Yeah.
I'm obsessed with what hormones do to the brain. I love this kind of work because it's huge, right? Like, and so I believe that once we're in this more like delta state and our brains are a bit quieter, even though sometimes we fight it a bit and everything. I think if we can sit there, I believe a delta state is going to allow us to access deeper sort of like layers of consciousness, right? Because we're just able to listen, and especially this kind of inner autumn time, it's such a good time. You can ask your subconscious questions at this time, and your subconscious will speak back to you. You know, it
Yeah.
may not be in a very coherent sense, it may just be an image, but it's a great time. You know, like, I don't know, say you've been focusing on trying to manifest something for quite a while, it's not quite working out. Come to your inner autumn and sit down and close your eyes and say, you know, like, okay, what's going on here? You know, like, you know, I'm speaking directly to you, subconscious, you know, like, I know
Mhm.
you can hear me. The delta waves are good today. Like, you know,
Yeah.
please tell me, you know, like, what are the blocks? What's going on? And it's amazing, like, what kind of stuff can come up for you, and you're just like, oh gosh, like, you know, and it may not come to you then, like, you know, it's never very linear or logical, but you may just have a memory come back to you, and you're like, oh, now I know why this doesn't work. You know, like, I've got
Mhm.
this particular patterning going on that really stops me from just stepping into that kind of energy or whatever, and it's amazing, you know. And definitely in autumn and in winter are the subconscious times,
Oh,
because your
that's
brain
fascinating.
is just much more, we're just much more able to access it. So yeah, I think that's one of the ways we can do it, and just almost prepare for it. I think it's almost like,
Mhm.
okay, so, you know, there's a book called The Optimized Woman by Miranda Gray. She is probably like one of the first, like the pioneers of talking about menstrual cycle awareness and everything. And in there, she calls, especially in the inner autumn, she calls a subconscious like the little puppy, a keen puppy. She's like, literally, once you develop a
Oh,
relationship with it, you know, like, you throw a ball and the puppy comes back, and she's like, at this time, once you develop that relationship with your subconscious, you can get it to work for you. It'll be so happy to be talking to you. And because you've got this easy access, it's so, you know, like, so write a list in the same way that you have the inner autumn list of everything that's annoying you. Potentially have another page somewhere in your journal where you're like, okay, these are the things I want to ask my subconscious, you know, like, why am I not doing this? Why am I not doing that? What's the block to this manifestation? And, you know, like, or, you know, is there any patterning here that I need to think about? Why, you know, and all of that. And then literally sit down, close your eyes. You can just even just put your hand on your journal, feel into the energy, ask the question directly, and believe you me, the answers will come. It is crazy how it happens.
yeah, I love that. And also to keep in mind, I think a lot of times when I, you know, invite people to speak to their higher self or subconscious or whatever they want to kind of consider connecting to that higher power, because it's all source energy when we get to that, is that they don't hear something. And it might be because they're not in a really perfect part of their cycle where they can, especially if they're new to trying to access their higher self or subconscious mind, you know, that block there because you're not in that wave. And so that's a really powerful thing to take away, that you may not hear
Yeah.
your higher self at certain parts just because of, you know, hormonal and brain waves. And
Yep.
that's, I love that I love that takeaway. Like that was like, okay, I'm done. That's all I needed to know. Like you did almost, you're like, okay, well, I can deal with my inner autumn now because now I can access my subconscious mind. Like that's so powerful to
Yeah.
me.
It's a wonderful feeling, you know, like, I believe every phase of the cycle has a superpower, and most
Mhm.
definitely the superpower of the inner autumn. One of them, it's actually I'll let you into a secret. I believe the time with the most superpowers. But one of the great superpowers of this time is accessing the subconscious and that like higher self, incredible wisdom. But it's not just accessing; it's being able to hear it come back to us. Like,
Mhm.
I think at other times we're very able to access that the vibrational pull of a manifestation. So say in a spring, in a summer, we'd be like, yeah. And that's probably the time when you're going to see 1,000 angel numbers. I don't know if you've ever
Mm.
noticed this, but sometimes
Yeah.
like my inner spring ovulation, if it's a good one, I'm like, wow, the angel numbers are everywhere, and then you get to
Yeah.
your inner autumn or your winter and you're like, the angels have deserted
They
me.
hate me. They abandoned me. Yeah, for sure. And you're like, I haven't seen any signs. Am I on the wrong path? Like, where are you?
And that's probably because maybe this is not the time to so much connect with that kind of vibrational energy,
Oh,
but it's more the
yeah.
kind of the deeper, this is more the shadowy stuff. This is where I need to like actually realize that I'm moving into a slightly sort of deeper kind of work for now, and just play around with that.
Mhm.
And just, yeah, like I said, really see how it feels for you in terms of manifesting energy. But like you said earlier, we don't always have to be high vibe to be manifesting. It's happening all the time. And the real, I believe, true powerful manifestation comes when you've got these darker, not darker, but like deeper, more subconscious patterning coming on board, becoming part of the whole mix. And that's when you really go, wow, this is all happening
Mhm.
now, right?
Mhm. Right.
And using the cycle can just be so powerful for that.
Right. Yeah. And I did want to share for anyone who's listening who hasn't really had the experience of connecting with their higher self or their subconscious mind. One of the most, I think I will remember it forever. The first time that I did it and I really got something back that impacted how I changed, I think I changed my life from it was, I sat down, I don't know where I was at in my cycle because it was 2 years ago, but I remember I was rocking my son. He was really a young baby and I just felt this stress all the time because I was starting my business and I was a new entrepreneur and I asked myself, like, why do I feel this way all the time? I've taken the stress from every job that I've ever had, and now I've brought it into this. And what I thought was the jobs is now here, and I'm creating my own business. Like, what is it? And it just gave me this image. It wasn't words. It was just this image of me squeezing a sponge and like a fist
Mm,
squeezing a sponge, not even me, it was a fist. And then it just showed like releasing the sponge. And so anytime it was so powerful because anytime I start to feel like that, I just imagine
sorry.
releasing the sponge. And then I'm like, oh, it's like it was
Mm,
just this like you're holding on too freaking tight. You're trying to control everything. And so be open to whatever your subconscious mind gives you because it's really your subconscious mind knows everything. It is the supercomputer. It knows exactly the path of least resistance that you need to know to get there quicker. So just be really open to whatever it's giving you. And maybe the symbol doesn't make sense, but it will
mm.
eventually. So
Yes,
what
and
else?
yes.
Go ahead. Sorry.
No, I was going to say that's such a good point because in the autumn, in the winter again, they're not very logical times. So don't expect a logical answer. It's not going to come to you in oh, do this, this, and this. Like you say, it could be an image, it could be a sensation, it could be a very random memory that initially makes no sense whatsoever. And you're just like, why am I thinking this?
Mhm.
Excuse me. And then it will kind of develop. So I think and I love your story about the sponge, right? we all know what it feels like to be squeezed too tight.
Yeah. Yeah, it was perfect. It was the perfect image that it could give me, and, it was very powerful. So what else do you think that we could start to do to use or is there another piece that you think is really important when it comes to
I'm so sorry. My Oh, I'm so sorry about that.
no, it's okay.
Yes.
That's a terrible feeling when it doesn't stop
Oh,
coughing.
another piece. Uh, I think also you mentioned the inner critic, and that is another big piece to think about. Using her to our advantage again, saying, like, okay, befriending her. We're so like, we tend to reject her, don't we? And we tend to be a bit, and it's not easy, I have to say, because, when you have that voice piping up, but using the inner critic to help us move forward again is amazing. And she I think she's a double-sided character in a way because she's kind of, you know, a little bit spiteful sometimes, a little bit nasty, but then also can be quite useful sometimes. Again, tying back into the truth speaking element of this time, like really, really like speaking what's really true for us. Because if we go back to hormones, I think I already mentioned. So estrogen makes us want to people please. It almost numbs us to ourselves a little bit. We're like, oh, I want to please everyone. And oh, the archetype during ovulation is the mother. And who is the biggest people pleaser of them all? The mother,
Mm,
right? Like we always want to care for everyone else. The archetype of the inner autumn, one of them is the wild woman, the woman who literally doesn't care anymore. And it's like really, like, I think also working with that inner critic, getting to know her voice quite well, understanding where she's piping up, and maybe you even have a list of questions for her. So, hi, a little bit of humor. There you are. Okay, good to see you. I knew you'd come along here. Okay, and challenge her and ask her, okay, so what are you telling me? And then very much going like, okay, well, that simply isn't true. Where's the evidence for that? Like maybe we all
mm,
have inner critic stories around being lazy or not achieving enough or whatever, right? Like, and but then going, well, actually I disagree with you because I've done this and this. But then maybe she will have a truth for us, and it's listening to that. So I think in autumn is also a great time to work with our inner critic and then use her again to feed into manifestation. Like you've said, all the entrepreneurial women you work with, or so many, have this really loud inner critic. I mean, she may manifest somewhere else in your cycle, so maybe work out where she comes up for you. Generally she will come up in inner autumn, but it's not a given deal that she's going to be there. She could pipe up when you're menstruating, so get to know where she comes up, get to know her voice, and yeah, just use her. Not in a kind of nice way. Just get her to
mm,
help you to move forward. And again, very much because the inner critic will probably be, or definitely linked to subconscious beliefs, right? So getting her to
mm,
help you access as well your subconscious patterning and things that are holding you back and all of that as well. So yeah, I
mm.
think it's a great time for inner critic work as well.
So you do think it's probably linked to your subconscious mind. You think it's deeper. It's not something that your logical mind is coming up with. So for example, something that I usually go through that I notice that I carry on, it was kind of a big breakthrough for me in my relationship with my husband because I knew that throughout my entire life when I was in the 9 to 5 or working at a hospital right before my period, everyone hated me. Everyone hated me. Like, why are they being mean to me? Why do they hate me now? And then I realized it wasn't that my husband hated me, it's that he didn't love me. But then I was like, oh, that's kind of the same thing. So this is something I need to dive into. So like it was something deeper subconscious. Is it ever something that's really little, do you think? Or
I It could be because the inner critic is quite complex, right? So it can sometimes just be like logical mind just playing around a little bit. That's why I think you could spend years and years doing the inner critic
Mhm,
work, but I think it's like
mhm,
knowing. I would say probably, well, in my experience and the experience like of working with clients in the inner critic, most of the time it is deeper stuff. It can masquerade as very like trivial things, but then like you say, like with your husband, you realized it was actually went a bit deeper. And there are, especially the inner autumn, there's a lot of feelings of abandonment around there. Like this is where they can manifest. We can feel very lonely, we can feel very unloved, and then we simultaneously will reject love when, so we've got this, like, a friend of mine did a reel not that long ago, which is like, me and my inner autumn, it's like, love me, hug me, love me, husband or partner comes closer, you're like, get away from me. It's this
yeah, right. Yeah.
but I mean, I don't know. I would say most of the time, even if it's something a bit trivial with it in critic, just always pausing to go, okay, is there anything else here? Because sometimes it is just a little like, and you're like, okay, whatever. But sometimes it is a little bit deeper, and you're just like, right, well, this again, we've got our little list, our inner autumn list now. We can write it there, and then when we're maybe not quite so turbulent in our minds, when the hormones have calmed down a bit, go back to it and go, yeah, this is a thing. This is something. And recurring themes, right? Is it coming up for you every month? If so, probably more a subconscious kind of
Mm,
issue going on.
mhm. And for anyone who's menopausal or starting to go through that, when they're there, A, do their hormones do the same thing every month? And
Mhm.
B, is it more that like maybe they're not going to have this inner autumn, and they're not going to have their winter, and they're following this moon cycle. But is it more that
Mm.
they just need to have a calendar, and they start to track, like, this is how I'm feeling, this week is
Mhm.
feeling a certain way? Will they see the same thing cyclically when once you've had menopause? Or I think, I don't, for in my head, I'm like, it's just like a flat line, like you get nothing. That's what I have in my head. So how does that work for
Yeah.
them?
So again, it will manifest very differently for every woman. You know, as you work with the moon cycle, you will see how that makes you feel. There is the founders of Red School. So I really recommend anyone who is listening to this to go and follow Red School. They wrote probably the book on menstrual cycle awareness. They were the women who really put together the concept of the inner seasons. They are amazing. Like, I'm just like, if you can have like a period crush, if you know what I mean, like girl crush on some two women, it's these two. They are just incredible. And one of the founders, she's gone through menopause and put together like a beautiful menopause program. And the whole menopause is a bit of an initiation. Like, there's a lot of stuff going on, and then you come out of the other side liberated, you know, if you kind of know what to look out for. And then once you're there, it really is, again, in the same way that no one menstrual cycle is the same for a woman. No postmenopausal experience of working cyclically is the same. So you might feel that the full moon is actually a bit overwhelming for you. It's a bit tiring. You might find that actually you prefer the energy of the new moon. So it's going to be like, again, the journaling, the reflecting, the feeling into it, and seeing how it manifests. In terms of our hormones, I mean, menopause is a long journey. It's like you've got the perimenopausal stage, then you're in menopause. Well, in medical terms, you hit menopause when you haven't had a period for 12 months, and then that's it, apparently. But like, it's very, very different in the way it expresses itself for us in our bodies, in our minds. But in once, because estrogen will be doing this for a long time, it will be shooting up and coming down, shooting up and coming down, and then eventually it'll be lowered. And what happens is our adrenal glands take over production of estrogen. So our ovaries kind of like, they just shut down, but in a lovely way. They're like, okay, we're done, like it's this. And
Mhm.
then our adrenals take over. So we still do produce estrogen, nowhere near at the levels, and we're not cycling in that sense anymore. But we are still very much cyclical beings, and very sensitive to everything going on outside. Because we've got this very like ancestral memory of being so connected to the earth and the moon cycles and things. So what I say to menopausal women is, really, download an app, find out what the moon is doing, whether you live in the countryside or in a city. Just start finding out what the moon is doing and just feeling into how that feels for you. Maybe start, like manifestation and the moon, right? That's a whole other topic. So you can do a lot of work around that as well. See how your energy feels at every single stage of the month. Maybe just at the beginning, start with new moon, full moon, play around with that. How do you feel around these times? How is your sleep? How is your energy? And then build out from that, and just see how it feels for you. Again, there's no wrong or right way. I mean, I really struggle with full moons. I can't sleep on them. I feel a bit
Right.
crazy. Like, sometimes I look up in the sky, and in theory I love it, but I'm like, oh God, like, here it comes. Like,
Right. I was just about to say, it feels so unfair that I did
mm,
not used to be synced up with the moon at all. And since I've been
mm,
on this like this journey of healing, I synced up with the moon. And so my period is like, it comes, it's all right where the full moon is. And I'm like, this feels really unfair because the full moon has that effect on me. I almost, like, until I became aware of it, my husband and I would have this huge blow up fight on the full moon every time, and I didn't, and I was like, oh, like, this is really related. Like, so now I'm like, the full moon's coming up, like,
yeah,
chill out, get past the full moon, and then, it's almost like write it down, and then when the full
yeah,
moon's over, let's readdress this. So it feels very unfair that it gets linked up, but I'm sure there is a reason as to why there's this
yeah,
huge energy, almost the same kind of energy, at least for me, that
yeah.
surrounds the full moon and right before my period started.
Absolutely. Well, I mean, traditionally, before we had like electricity and all of that, most women would bleed on the full moon. And there's a real belief that it is a very releasing kind of energy. So it does not surprise me at all that you used to have this blowout with your husband like a day before, whatever. Like, you're releasing your womb lining, right? All the stuff that's
Mhm.
been sort of like building up all month, because although our bleeds are the beginning of our cycles, they're also tying up what's just happened the month before. So there's all of that release. And you've got the moon, so you've got like the double whammy of energy. And
Yeah.
I feel that, like when it happens to me, I kind of move about a bit. I'm a bit irregular now because I'm in perimenopause. But my goodness, when I have a full moon and a bleed, it's like, ooh,
Yeah. I
like
feel
really, I
that.
should just go to a cave and just like,
Safer for everyone, including
yeah,
yourself.
yeah.
Yeah, and you don't sleep, so it's like, well, what should I do?
I
Yeah.
know. And every time it happens, I'm like, okay, next time I'm gonna get up in the middle of the night and I'm just gonna light candles, I might pull some cards, I'm gonna journal. I never do. I just lie there tossing and turning all night. And then I'm like, why did I do that?
Yeah, I can usually make myself I mean, since it's coming up, I've been waking up at like 3:30 in the morning every morning. I get like 4 hours of sleep. I'm like, "Okay, here I am, I'm awake." I can usually make myself wake up and do breath work and meditate, but I do it lying down. I can't make myself sit up and do it, and then I'm like, "Okay, maybe I'll fall back asleep after I do this."
Yeah, yeah,
Is
yeah, yeah,
there
yeah.
anything else that you feel like is really important for anyone who is really trying to create this correlation between the hormones and manifestation before we start to wrap things up?
I think it's just kind of going back to the message of feeling into how it feels for you again and again. There is no wrong or right way, but I feel bringing in cyclical awareness to your manifesting practice is like that next step, and can
Mhm.
just be so beautiful. Um, I don't really know if there's a lot written about it. This is my personal experience with myself, with my clients, but really feeling into it and being open to allowing the more shadowy sides of manifestation to also be part of the process, and I think that's a really important part of like the whole cyclical living. It's like the yin and yang, the highs and lows, and all of it is good. Not good, but
Mhm.
all of it, there's a wholeness about it. And in the same way that the menstrual cycle is whole, like a manifesting process can be whole as well. It's not just that yay high vibe, but it's all the other work that goes. It's almost like backstage work, isn't it? Like
Mhm.
all the props and all the changes that happen at the back, so you can then do this beautiful work up front as well. So yeah.
Yeah, I've definitely had a lot of really powerful takeaways from this conversation. And I think that it's just really important to know that like you're okay that you have different moods throughout
Mm,
your cycle and it doesn't mean that you're not manifesting. And it's
mm,
almost like trying to create not only awareness on all of it, but maybe not going too far one direction or the other, not ignoring that you're having these feelings of anxiety and inner critic. Just like don't keep trying to push her away and
yeah.
sweep everything under the rug and don't go like full force all the way in because maybe that doesn't need to be done either. Creating this really safe space of awareness and
Yeah.
choosing how far you're going to go versus almost letting it control you. I feel like that's where I was and still learning to do is
Mm,
not let it just take over my life and it control
mm,
me and
mm-hmm.
and creating awareness so that you can pause and be like, what am I going to do with this thought or feeling that I'm having right now? And not letting yourself swing pendulum like really far one way and really far the
Yeah.
other. I mean, maybe there's times that you need to do that, but I think the
Yeah.
awareness is really huge.
Yeah, absolutely. The awareness is huge. And like, we do still want to have a balance in our hormones. So if it's repeatedly month in, month out, like it's a real struggle, you're getting other symptoms, then, that's something that needs the kind of the more physical work, maybe the nutrition shift, so that, maybe a
Mhm.
bit of testing, that's also okay.
Yeah,
But it's kind of knowing where you're like, okay, this is where I really do sit as a hormonal woman. This is, maybe a few days of feeling a bit whatever. This is fine. This is good. And like you say, I think a lot of it comes from resisting and being told we have to fight it and it's a curse and all of this stuff. And even in those moments when it really hits hard, if you really, really sit with it and surrender to it, it usually doesn't last anywhere near as long. And you're like, okay, it's almost like a bit of a
yeah,
tidal wave, and then you're like, oh, all right, rather than like, maybe. And it's not easy, I get it, if we are still working like a 9 to 5, or kids are running around everywhere, but it's not that easy. But maybe when you're feeling like you're going to burst, like almost taking yourself somewhere for 5 minutes and just allow it to just move through your body, and then just going, okay, right, okay, I've got this, I've really got this.
Mhm.
So there is acceptance there, but also knowing when maybe, making some changes are also important in terms of lifestyle, nourishment, and all of that as well, right? It's this little, it's a little like like a scale, and we're always balancing one and the other, and we're always feeling into how it really feels for us, and having acceptance, but also self-awareness when we want to make bigger changes, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that back up, especially since that is a lot of the work that you do with the nutrition. And one of the
Yeah.
takeaways you kept saying in this the podcast that I listened to before, you're like, it's the caffeine. It's probably the caffeine. I'm like, okay, I hear you. Like, and I cut down to just one
Yeah.
cup of coffee or caffeinated beverage a day, which is probably still too much for me, but made a significant difference. So it's not like, when
Mm.
you're saying nutritional changes, people don't have. Some people might, but it's not like you're getting rid of everything that makes you happy in your day, but maybe just decreasing to one cup of coffee is going to have a huge impact on your hormones and how you feel every month.
Absolutely. And that's why I really love the gentle nutrition support that you do when you work with your cycle, because there are times in the cycle when we are able to handle caffeine a lot more. Like our
Mhm.
livers kind of change in the way they detox throughout the month because, for example, estrogen is detoxed through the liver, as is progesterone. But estrogen is it's quite a heavy hormone to detox, and we do need to detox it. Otherwise, if it stays in our systems, it can lead to the really bad PMS and lots of other symptoms. But there are times when estrogen, we can just handle it better, and we can handle caffeine better. So you might find that when you're ovulating, I wouldn't ever recommend drinking like 3 or 4 cups of coffee a day, but you might drink that coffee when you're ovulating and feel fabulous. You drink that coffee a week later, and halfway through, this happens to me, I'm like a jittery mess. And I'm like, oh, I forgot.
Right.
And I would
Yeah.
say as well, sometimes that low energy or that tiredness is there for a reason. So
Mm,
I sometimes know that when I am at my most tired is when I should least be drinking the coffee, even though like I do want to drink it. It's like actually
mhm.
this is when I should surrender to that tiredness, and allow myself not to be, because it doesn't actually give me like good energy. It just makes me feel very, very jittery and very nervous and very anxious.
Right.
So watching
Yeah.
out for those patterns as well. You don't necessarily have to go and do like loads of deep functional medicine work. Maybe it's just you like tweaking here and there as well.
Mhm. Thank you so much for being here. You're such a beautiful human, and I can't thank you enough for being here and sharing your knowledge with us. Where can everybody go and find you to learn more from
Um,
you?
yeah, so come and find me on Instagram. I am at hormones_in_harmony. That's probably where I'm most active. So come along, say hello, drop me a DM if you've got any questions following up from this podcast. And I love to hear from people. So please do. As you know, Lauren, I love a voice note, so I will send you a voice note back. And yeah, that's the best place to come and find me, most definitely. And I've really enjoyed our conversation. It's been so lovely to connect with you today.
I feel like we could go on for hours. Like I just
Yes,
have
we
so many
could.
more questions. It was perfect. Thank
I
you
can
so
come back and do a
much.
sequel at some point. Don't you
Yeah.
worry.
So we'll do like a monthly cycle of your conversations. Thank you so
Amazing.
much.